Welcome to the next phase of our tutorial on using Git and GitHub. Now I want to talk about configuring your Unity project in the GitHub folder. So here I have my base GitHub folder. This is where my repository is located. So I go in here, you can see that I currently have my git ignore and my git readme file. This is what was already put in there. I've also now created a separate folder for my Unity project itself. This is going to be an important thing to do because you're probably going to end up with folders for artwork, design files, all sorts of things that are going to be parallel to this Unity project. So probably a good idea to have its own project folder here. Obviously, you could have used the base Git repository folder for the Unity project, but that will just leave you with a disaster area of files in this main folder and it'll get really confusing. So it's much easier if you just have that Unity project all by itself. If I go into this tutorial folder, you can see here's my Unity project. So going back out here now, this is the important thing. Let's take a look at that git ignore file first. All right, so I'm going to go back into source tree and take a look at this git ignore file. Notice that it's /library /temp /object /builds, etc., right? So what that means is in the current folder, look for these subfolders. So that means that this git ignore folder needs to be in the base Unity folder in order to work. Right now it's not. So this is the tricky part. This is the most important thing about setting up Unity for Git, is making sure that you put your git ignore file in the right location. A lot of the other tutorials don't really point this out, and so they assume that your Git repository and your Unity project are the same folder. So in most cases, this is not really a problem. However, if you don't use the same folder for your Unity project and for the Git repository, this is going to create a problem. So before I do any commits or anything else with the Git repository, I want to put this git ignore file in the right place. Now, the cool part about git ignore files is that they're actually hierarchical in structure, and each lower level of the hierarchy overrides, or adds to, actually, technically, not really overrides, but it adds to any higher level git ignore files. So you can actually have multiple git ignore files, so that, some might cover all the projects in your repository, others just work for one specific folder and all of its child folders. But right now, we don't need a git ignore file in this top folder because we're not going to have anything at this level or in the other subfolders that we necessarily want to ignore. Most of the time, it's just going to be code files that you're going to want to ignore, because most everything else you're just going to want to keep. So the first thing we need to do is we need to move this git ignore file. So I'm going to just go ahead and drag it and move it to the Unity project. So once this git ignore file is alongside these assets, libraries, project settings, and temp folders, then everything will be good and this will work exactly as we expect it. So now we go back into our source tree repository and we can see that there is now this uncommitted changes. All right, so let's go ahead and see what it thinks are the changes. So this is the important thing here, is that every time you want to do a commit, you want to double check that the things you're committing make sense. All right, so here, okay, you'll notice over here it says minus git ignore. That means that it is deleting this git ignore file. All right, notice that it's !tutorial/git ignore, which actually means it's going to be adding all of this stuff. You can see that it's adding in the tutorial folder, project settings, assets, blah, 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 blah. You'll notice that nothing in the library folder, nothing in the temp folder, and nothing in the other folders, the object folder or any of those other folders, is getting synchronized. Only the project settings, which is exactly what we want. It's that library folder that has a bunch of temporary files that get rebuilt every single time you build your Unity project that we don't want to deal with. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly dealing with merging those files, and that's a mess. So here we can verify that what we want is only the project settings, because there's no code yet. There's no scripts. There's no anything like that. So we're good. We've set everything up correctly. We can go ahead and commit this. So let's go through the process then of making our first commit. All right, so we're still on the master branch, which is fine for now because we're setting up the project. It's cool that we're on the master branch. We'll deal with creating other branches in a later tutorial. So for now, it's okay that we're on the master branch because we're the only one working on the project so far. We're setting it up so that the default works exactly as it should. So here we have this uncommitted changes. What we want to do is we want to actually commit. So what a commit does is it saves your local changes and it creates a moment in time, a commit message that's keyed into today's date and today's time that records these specific changes. This lets us jump back in the project to any previous point that we've committed and be able to restore the project at that point. So when a file gets corrupted, when someone overwrites your work and deletes it, you just go back to an earlier point and there it is. So here we are, we're going to make our first commit. So click on uncommitted changes. All right, so again, we're just validating these files are correct. Now here's the key here. To commit these files, right now we could try and commit it and there's nothing to commit. We need to move all these files from unstaged into staged. All right, once something is staged, that means it's going to be processed as part of the commit. So since we know we want to make all these changes, go ahead and stage all. Now you can see that the commit has properly attributed all of the changes that we need. Okay, so here R means we've renamed it, which technically moving is a rename. So yes, that's correct. And then it's adding all of these other files. Great, that's exactly what we wanted. All of these project settings, good to go. So now we go ahead and commit these changes by clicking on the commit button. Now notice that it pops up this little window down here where we can start typing. All right, so what you want to do is you want to add a unique message that describes what the key changes were that you made here. One of the key things about using code versioning well is to put a commit message that really is specific and that identifies all the changes made in this commit. This is why you want to make your commits very small so that you can talk about just one specific change. Change the color of a sprite, change the location of a sprite, added this method, removed this method, changed this, changed that. You don't want to make huge sweeping changes usually in a commit. So we want to keep these small. So I'm just going to say created initial Unity project. All right, because that's basically all that I did. Okay, now here is an easy way to make it automatically go up to the remote repository, and that is push changes immediately to origin master. Now this is going to be different once we add other branches, but for now, you want to almost always check that off so that you immediately post it to the remote repository. Of course, if you don't currently have internet access, then obviously you don't want to do that. Things could go very badly. Once you've set that up, that's it. Now we just commit. So we're going to go ahead and commit. It might take a little while when there's a lot of changes to be made. It's going to take some time because it has to upload all those changes to the remote repository. But in this case, there were only a few changes, so it was pretty quick. Now take a look. Here we had our initial commit, and then now we have our first official commit where we created the initial Unity project. You'll notice that they each still have their little description. We have the author who created them. We have a timestamp, and we can see immediately by looking in this window down here what all these changes were. And if you click on one of these, if it's a text file, you'll be able to read it over here on the right. If it's not a text file, then it'll look different. So that's pretty much it for setting up and creating your initial Unity project. Now there's one final change that we actually need to make to the actual Unity project itself so that it works with our GitHub project effectively. And that's going to be in the editor settings. So you go into the project settings, all right, and then into editor. And over here in the inspector, you'll see two things that we care about. Version control. And we want to make sure that this is visible meta files, which it is now by default. And then the other thing we want to do is here under asset serialization, we want to choose force text. So those are set up now by default. So in this case, this is Unity 2017. We don't have any other changes to make here. In earlier versions of Unity, these were not the default behavior. So if you're using an older version of Unity, you might see some differences there, but in 2017 looks like we have default behavior that already works with our GitHub system. Since no changes needed to be made, we don't need to actually commit this, and we can move on with our project.